What is up, DePaul fans, and welcome back to the Blue Demon Banter brought to you by We Are DePaul. I'm your host, Joey Pollizze, and we have a fantastic guest on today's show. It is none other than Scott, We Are DePaul writer. Scott, how are we doing today?
Doing well, Joey. Thanks for having me on. And you're far too kind with your praise in terms of my level of knowledge that I'm bringing to this podcast today.
Yeah, Scott's been around the college basketball landscape for a long time, so you probably won't say it, but he knows a lot. He knows a lot. So we'll get into all things in this episode. We'll talk about the first game. We'll look ahead to game two. Some big announcements today about Redshirts, and we'll talk through it all. But first, let's talk about that first game, Scott. DePaul with the 92-62 win over Chicago State. Kind of give me your first impressions from the team in that first game.
Well, Joey, it's tough to kind of glean a lot from that because Chicago State's going to be probably one of the five worst Division One teams that we have this season out of a pool of about 360. So, the level of competition wasn't very strong, but I think the encouraging signs that you can take from it is the depth obviously showing through, all 12 guys scoring, grabbing a rebound, getting a chance to have different lineups that you throw out there, as we talked about a lot this preseason with head coach Chris Holtman, and the way that he's still trying to find different lineups and rotations that he's looking for the rest of the regular season. And I think the biggest takeaway is the defensive tenacity. We've talked a lot this offseason about this being a bigger, more athletic team that can really get out and guard on the perimeter. Obviously, way too many fouls, particularly in the second half. But you're going to get some games where you have crews that are going to differ from how a Big East game is called down the line. So, a lot of encouraging signs for the defense, just in terms of ball pressure, forcing Chicago State turnovers, forcing them into bad shots, and really imposing their will on the game the entire way. I mean, when you look at last season's opening game, obviously an overtime thriller where Jacob Meyer had to bail them out with his heroics and a last minute shot. A 30-point win is a pretty nice thing to have for Blue Demon fans, considering how they've been the last few years.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's hard to take a ton from this game because Chicago State, like they were bad. Like they were very
Yeah.
bad. Like it was tough to watch at time for Chicago State. But I thought DePaul did a lot of nice things in that game. They started Blocker, Benson, Gunn, Banks, and Macklin, which was what we thought all along. Like that's kind of the five that we thought all along. Macklin with the experience, but after the game, Holtman wouldn't commit to going with that starting five in game two. He kind of said it's going to be a fluid situation and they're kind of gonna go through different lineups throughout the year. So I think that is big for DePaul and shows how deep they might be this year. Like you have guys like R.J. Smith who can start whenever he wants. You have Theo, excuse me, who had another great game after two great exhibition games. Theo only played 15 minutes, but 12 points, one of the four Blue Demons in double figures. And I know you got to see Theo in the second exhibition game against Notre Dame. Kind of what did you see from him in that game, and kind of what did he say after game two against Notre Dame?
Yeah, Teo has been a revelation so far. I mean, from what we've discussed with the coaching staff and what we've seen this preseason, the growth in his game is significant from year one to year two. And I think a lot of times this offseason, fan base talked a lot about the big three returning. Everybody was excited about Layden Blocker and CJ Gunn and NJ Benson. And here, Teo Pierre Justin is kind of getting lost in the equation in terms of the type of guy that might be able to contribute to this team this season. And now, especially the Notre Dame exhibition where he had the ball in his hands and he was making intelligent reads as a passer. He hit a couple 3-pointers. He rebounded. He defended in isolation. He was switching defensively. I think he feels a lot more comfortable playing at the four this season than playing some extended minutes at the five to end last season. If DePaul fans recall, the end of last season, David Skogman was hurt for the final 10 games. NJ Benson was also dealing with injury. They were really playing with a modified group where they're just throwing whatever bodies were healthy out there. And I think that a lot of times, Teo Pierre Justin being a true freshman didn't really benefit from that because he was having to go against Big East caliber big men as a true freshman playing out of position at the five. I think he's much more comfortable and better suited at the four. He's much more of a playmaker than I think a lot of the fan base anticipated. And you're looking at his development as the type of guy who you might be able to contribute off the bench this year. And it's encouraging the signs that have come along early.
Yeah, I think he's making more opportunities for him, to start the season. I think he's going to get more run because he honestly looked great, and you see the confidence from him, taking form. Last year, as a
Definitely.
freshman from overseas, from France. Like it takes a little bit of an adjustment period. And this year, we're seeing him be more confident with ball. We're seeing his 3-point shooting actually, he's looking great with the 3-point shooting out there. So it's some great signs for DePaul because, like you said, like everyone said, the big three return, like that's going to be key. But Teo was also on this team last year. And I think what we've seen here, Teo's going to have a role on this DePaul team this year for sure. And I just want to bring up this quote that Holtman said after the game on Monday. He said, I think Teo has put in a lot of work. He's just got a lot of confidence in his shooting right now. His shooting numbers in practice have kind of confirmed that. And we love how he's playing and certainly love how he's developed. Like some high praise from Coltman right there. And I think we're going to see him have a larger role throughout the season. Like he's going to get minutes, and I think he could play his way into kind of a larger role. And I think we're seeing the players also see that. Like Benson after the game praised Teo for what he's able to do. In the offseason, too, he said that no player was in the gym more than Teo this offseason. That's some high praise for Teo, and it speaks to his development. It speaks to the type of player that he could be, for this DePaul team this year. I guess any other takeaways from this DePaul team from game one? I know not a lot, but a 30-point victory was nice. Anything else that jumped out to you?
Not particularly, Joey. Again, you're looking at a Chicago State team that was playing a guy in Byard who was 6'8", and that's the biggest body they're often throwing out there. This is one of the smaller teams in college basketball, as we mentioned, one of the bottom 5 expected teams in college basketball. Really, not much of a test other than, again, you're kind of throwing different lineups out there, seeing what sticks, seeing what guys work in rotation with one another defensively, who might have some chemistry offensively. So, if you see some stretches of poor play as a DePaul fan, just understand that Chris Holtman right now is experimenting with a lot of different things. He's trying to find the right rotation and the right pieces. And if you recall last season, the rotation when Big East play came along shortened up quite a bit as, we saw guys like Jacob Meyer get phased out and we saw guys like David Thomas start to step up a little bit. So we will see some guys that play a lot of early minutes in this non-conference portion of the schedule really not play as much during the Big East portion of the schedule when it gets a lot more physical and athletic. So, again, we're going to be seeing a lot of lineups that get tested. It's going to be fascinating to see which ones kind of stick throughout the year.
Yeah, this is kind of a trial period, like in a sense for those, deep end of the bench guys like come on and maybe Cruz and, someone like Teo. If these guys and Ilya, like if these guys continue to step up and play, they're going to have minutes when it comes to Big East play. But this is a good trial period. And I think we saw some good things from the younger guys, the freshmen on the team. Obviously we talked about Teo a little bit, but also I thought we saw some good things from Cruz. Obviously, this is a guy, a younger player, a freshman who is it's gonna take him time to really develop. But this is a player that wasn't afraid to shoot it in game one. He went 1 for 4. Like the shots were there, they just didn't fall. But 1 for 4, and we also saw Ilya make a couple threes. So those are going to be some key guys I think that will have to step up down the stretch. But I think having them get minutes right now, I think is very important for this DePaul team, and it shows that Cruz is going to get minutes here in year one. He's going to get minutes. Coaching staff has praised him. Players have praised him. And I think it's important that Cruz continues to develop, especially in non-conference play when they're playing teams like Chicago State and they're playing teams like Stonehill on Friday. Like these teams that aren't as competitive. So when it comes time for Big East play, hopefully Cruz is at a point where he's ready to take that next step. But one player who won't be a freshman, who will not be playing this year, is Isaiah Medina. We got the news from Holtman earlier on Wednesday that Isaiah Medina will be redshirt freshman. I guess what are kind of your immediate thoughts on that?
I think it's interesting that, you're taking a guy who, by all accounts, is around the top 150 prospects in the country, and you're going to develop him for the year. You're going to sit him out and make sure that he's, physically capable to compete at the Big East level. It also speaks to how DePaul obviously trusts its front court rotation this season. I think a 7-footer last year, and Medina easily plays in that rotation last year. They needed additional size, but now that they've recruited a much bigger roster this season, obviously with Maker being 7'1", 7'2" there in the middle, having a guy like Jeremy Lorenz who can kind of play as a flex 4-5 in the backcourt rotation, Teo stepping things up. They have a lot more front court pieces than I think that the fan base was ready for entering the season. So to have Medina, kind of sit things out, develop a little bit. I think it's good for him. It's good for the program. You look at the encouraging signs that Teo obviously took from year one to year two, and you're hoping as a fan base for the same thing for Isaiah Medina. You want to see growth. You want to see his body start to fill out. You want to see his skill level start to, grow, and you want to see the confidence there so that when he steps on the floor for year two as a redshirt freshman, that he's able to contribute right away in the rotation.
Yeah, I think this was a move that was expected. Holtman kind of hinted at it over the course of the offseason, saying, they're still evaluating him. They still want to see some more from him in practice. And he's been playing with the scout team, according to Holtman, for most of, the past couple of weeks. So it was expected that Medina would redshirt. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing for him. Like big men,
No, not at all.
yeah, like big men usually take some time to develop. And he wasn't going to have minutes this year. Like you mentioned, the front court is a little bit, bigger. There's more depth there this year. So it's not a bad thing. You have him primarily this year learning the game, and hopefully you see him take a jump in year two. Hopefully he's back next year, of course. Hopefully they bring him back and he wants to come back. But it's not a bad thing at all. And I think this is a player who has the potential to eventually be a fantastic college basketball player. Like the talent is there. The height is there. The defensive prowess is there. And the shooting is there from Isaiah. Hopefully he can put it all together, and hopefully, not being able to play this year and him be able to take a seat and watch the game can kind of really help him, heading into the 2026-2027 season next year. But we also found out that today Fabian Flores can play immediately this season. He can go right in now. He has been granted eligibility for this year. While we don't know what his role might look like or if he will play at all this season, I guess it's another great sign that they could stick a guy who is 7'2" and they could stick him on the court, when he's ready, right, Scott?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's never a bad thing to have more size and more depth. In college basketball, you can't just go out and sign a guy to a 10-day contract if you have injuries. You can't make a trade at the deadline. Those things don't exist. You're set with your roster already in place. So to add just another 7-footer to the mix who might be able to play this season, it's not a bad thing at all. DePaul had a lot of injury issues last year, particularly with their front court. You look at how, tough the Big East is and how you need that kind of physicality up front. And again, having another 7-footer there, we might not have him playing much this season, but it's not a bad thing to have him around.
Yeah, exactly. And there's not, obviously, he got a late start to the season and whatnot. He just gained eligibility now. So there might not be a role for him this season, but, having the potential to put him into the fire in these non-conference games, I think we could see happen. But I think it's just really great to see DePaul have some size this year. I mean, you look at the roster. Teo is 6'8". Fabian is 7'2". Kaman is 7'1". You have Isaiah who did redshirt, but he's 7 foot. And then you have guys like Caleb Banks and NJ Benson, 6'8", 6'9". Like that is some size, and that's going to be very, very important come Big East play, because when it comes to Big East plays, the physicality, the height, all that is intensified. So it's going to be great to have those type of players come when it comes time for a Big East play. So we'll see with Fabian what happens this year, or if he will play. But I think having him for potentially next season with a guy like Isaiah, maybe come on too, like that is some height that DePaul could have for next year, because they could all come back for next year. But I want to turn now a little further. On last week's episode, we talked about me and Dan talked about where we think DePaul might finish in the Big East this year. It might be a little too early, but I want to get your thoughts on where you might have DePaul in the Big East this year. I have them not finishing the bottom three. I have them finishing 7 or 8. Where do you see DePaul finishing in the Big East this year?
I'm kind of high on them as well compared to how the national media perceives them. I kind of look at them as around 7th as well, Joey. To me, you look at the Ken Pom preseason projections, and I'm just kind of looking at it right now as we talk. And, so many of these teams in the secondary tier outside of UConn, St. John's, Creighton, and Marquette are just, and from Villanova as well to an extent, but Providence through Georgetown, all 63 through 88 nationally on Ken Pom. I mean, to have a pack of 6, 7 teams that are within the same 25 spots among 360 teams nationally in your preview, it kind of shows how balanced that back end of the league is this year. And to me, I think DePaul's continuity with their big three coming back says a lot. I think that Holtman is got a lot to prove as a coach in year 2, whereas some of these programs like Kim English at Providence have, kind of blown preseason expectations the last 2 years and finished below them. So you look to them to kind of, prove themselves a little bit as well. Seton Hall, I don't see a lot out of. I'm higher on Georgetown than a lot of people. I think Ed Cooley's still a heck of a coach.
Yeah.
And when you give him a couple years of talent, he will figure it out. I'm not that high on Butler. I'm iffy on Xavier. Again, you're on a first year coach with Richard Pitino. So to me, a lot of those teams are so even, and we're talking about this right now in early November. It's going to look a lot different 2 months from now when injuries start to factor into things, when you have guys who have been guaranteed something in the NIL system who aren't getting playing time or the shots that they desire, and they're pouting and team chemistry starts to change. We see that more and more now as the season gets earlier on. So I don't think DePaul's going to face those issues. To me, like, I think the chemistry of this group is pretty tight. I think they're bought into what Chris Holtman is trying to achieve in year 2. And I think there's a lot of hunger on this roster that some of these bottom teams in the Big East might not have, with some of these veteran coaches who might be on the way out. So for me, I have them finishing kind of in the 7-8 range like you do as well, Joey. Obviously, they are not at the liberty of having an injury like some of these other rosters. They are a little thinner in terms of their backcourt depth, particularly at point guard. There are major question marks with how Leighton Blocker and RJ Smith will handle a pressure backcourt in the Big East, particularly a team like St. John's that really gets out and defends. But, by and large, I think that there's a big talent upgrade. You talked about the size upgrade. Last year on Ken Palm, they were dead in the middle of the country, 180th in terms of average height. This year, they're coming in at 70th, and that doesn't include Fabian's addition to the roster, which should push them even higher as a 7-footer. So, again, we talked a lot about adding that length and that athleticism, particularly on the perimeter to defend, and on the front court to draw more fouls and to have more bodies against the edge of fours of the league, and to just be able to stay in games defensively. There were so many times that a team last year with small, low, mid-major guards just could not handle the rigors of Big East play. I don't think we'll see that from this group this year. I think that they're going to be competitive in more games, and I think they can finish as high as 7th.
Yeah, I don't think it's bad to say that they could finish as high as 7th. I think the potential is there. They have the players to do it. Now it's just up to see how they fare in Big East play. But I think I want to go back to what you said about the backcourt facing pressure, and we saw Chicago State put some pressure on Leighton and put some pressure on the team in the second half, and they didn't do a good job with it. DePaul did not do a good job with it. And Chicago State, I guess we're only outscored by 5 points in the second half. So you hope that was a good learning lesson for this team. And you hope that by the time Big East comes, you can learn a lot, because there was sloppy play from DePaul in the second half, going back to that game on Monday night. Sloppy play, and that mostly came in the second half. First half, they were ready. They came prepared, and that's what Holtman said. And then the second half, I don't know if it was a sense of they're already up by 25. And, when you're already beating someone so badly, the gas pedal's not all the way up. You kind of hold back a little bit. So, but Chicago State was doubling in corners, and DePaul turned over the ball quite a lot in the second half. So you hope that that's something that they can improve on here heading into game 2. And I guess, Scott, you're going to be there on Friday night. You're going to be watching them. What are you most looking forward to on Friday night from this team? What do you want to see them kind of do better or do well in this game against Stonehill?
I think limit turnovers is really the big thing. Limit turnovers, and like you said, kind of handle the ball pressure that some of these smaller teams are going to throw at them early in the year. A lot of Big East teams are not going to press as much as some of these small teams. These teams are behind. They're playing from behind. They have smaller front courts. They have to go through extensive means to try to stay competitive in these games. And, it's a good test for DePaul, especially with this new look backcourt, to get those kinds of different looks early in the season. But again, Stonehill's coming from the NEC. They're once again, in the 40 range in Ken Palm. So expected to be one of the worst teams in college basketball. They play in the worst conference. They played Chicago State twice last season and beat them once by 2 points. So, again, you're looking at kind of an even type of opponent from what we saw in the opener on Monday night. And so for me, it's about limiting turnovers, maintaining that defensive intensity without fouling. And again, finding more lineups and rotation spots that solidify themselves, where you look at a lineup and say, okay, this is a group of five that could really play together in the Big East, or this is a group that I want to see more out of as non-conference play goes along. Again, we're testing a lot of different lineups right now and seeing what works and what doesn't. And just because a guy plays poorly or has a bad stretch doesn't mean that he's going to be bad the rest of the season. It just might not be the proper fit for him in terms of the lineup on the floor at the current moment. So, there's ups and downs during the season. I think you look for a 20+ point victory that limits turnovers with good defensive pressure, and that's just about all you can ask for here.
Yep, I agree. In game one, DePaul against Chicago State, they turned over the ball 13 times. That was more than turn over the ball against Loyola and Notre Dame. So you want to see that aspect improve. Chicago State gave them pressure. Stonehill's probably going to be playing from behind for most of the game. They're probably going to put some pressure on Layden and RJ. So you want to see them improve. I 100% agree with you, Scott. And before we end this episode, I want to get your thoughts, your predictions on how the rest of this month will go for DePaul. They play Stonehill on Friday. You think they win?
Yeah, I do.
They play next Tuesday against Buffalo. You think they take the win?
I do. Yeah, I think, really for November, the marquee games are Northwestern and obviously the trip to Destin.
Yeah.
And the Northwestern game is a return one from last year where they kind of got exposed a little bit after a good stretch of non-conference play to start the year. So you want some redemption there, especially because they've done so well against the Chicago local teams already this preseason and beating Chicago State. So the Northwestern game's key for me. I mean, again, you have a home court game there. That's one where you look to the metrics that the Big Ten will provide and what Northwestern will provide, and you hope that that's a good win on your home floor. And again, Georgia Tech's supposed to be promising as well. They're getting a lot of buzz in terms of an underrated sleeper ACC team, but that Northwestern game, you got to get some revenge from what happened to you last year.
Yep, DePaul was embarrassed last year against Northwestern, but they should beat Stonehill. They should beat Buffalo. Should beat Gardner-Webb November 18th. Should beat Detroit Mercy November 13th. November 23rd, excuse me. And you got smack dab in the middle of those games. Northwestern, November 14th, at home at Wintrust Arena. The fans need to show out for that game, but it'll be an interesting one. That will be the game where we see if DePaul can take that next step this year. But Scott, thanks for coming on the show, man. It's great to have you on here. Hopefully to have you on more. But that's going to do it here on episode 2 of the Blue Demon Banter, brought to you by We Are DePaul. Go Blue Demons.